Hi folks. Well, it's been about a month, I guess, since my last video, and I want to catch you up on what I've been doing. Got really hot in Las Vegas. We decided to take a month and go to the California coast and keep cool. And I have to confess that during that month I didn't do a thing on the van. So just recently I've taken it up again. And this past weekend I took a trip up to the Spring Mountains, about an hour or so out of Las Vegas, and spent some time hiking and wrestling an elk, which I'll tell you about a little later in this video. I also decided upon some conversion or some modifications that I want to do to my build, and I'll tell you why. This is all based on my experience, in camping and figuring out what I really want, for my van and how I want it to work. So with that, let's get on with it. Talk to you later. So before we get started in earnest here, I want to talk a little bit about the cost of van insurance. And this was interesting to me because I was shocked when I got my first bill from State Farm Insurance, and it turns out that the cost of insurance for my van was more expensive than my fairly late model Subaru, which I bought a couple years ago, and it was roughly on the order of $1,200 a year. And I thought, wow, this is crazy for me to be paying this much in insurance. So I called them up and I started discussing, and it turns out I told them what I was doing with the van, that I was turning it into an RV, and would there be any change in my insurance if it were considered an RV rather than a cargo van? And they said yes, but you have to jump through some hoops. And basically what I had to do was I had to show them the total costs of the modifications that I had done. I had to show them the mileage. I had to show them pictures of the finished interior of the van, focusing in particular on the fact that there was a bed in the van and that there were kitchen facilities in the van. So after I did that, then I got the new rate, and I was shocked to discover that it became $400 per year as opposed to $1,200 per year. So that's something to keep in mind when you're doing a conversion. When you've got it close to finished, contact your insurance company, see if you can get a break. So I think the last time I talked to you, I had just taken a trip to Utah, and I had determined there were a bunch of changes that I needed to make to the van, and I made those, and I'll talk about those in this video. But this time I took a trip to the Spring Mountains, which was about an hour and a half outside of Las Vegas, just to get cool. And I discovered a few more things that I wanted to do to the van based on my experience there. The first thing was that the road I took, I went to Cold Creek, which was a little bit north of Lee Canyon, if you're familiar with that. But in order to get to this site, I had to go over some really rough road. Okay, so I would characterize this as four-wheel drive road, but I was very careful. Even though I've got low clearance, I was very careful, and I was able to make my way in there, but it shook the hell out of everything in that van, and I came up with some modifications as a result of that. It was really a beautiful spot. I set up camp, and I was sitting in my camp chair. I was listening to my audio book, and then I felt this. And Lacey, my dog, was lying right beside me, and all of a sudden I felt this nudge against the back of my head. All right. Well, I looked around, and this is what I saw. Yeah. This is a young bull elk who had come up and just bumped me on the back of my head. I was so shocked, I didn't want to make a sudden move. I didn't know what this elk was going to do. So I just very slowly took this picture, took another picture, and it became pretty clear that he was pretty docile. And he ended up, hanging around the camp for quite a while. At one point I was standing in back of the van doing something. I closed the door, and there he was right in front of me. So I reached out and he nuzzled my hand. I couldn't believe it. Lacey went up to him and sniffed his rear leg. No problems. He just took it in stride, and he even lay down. He stayed in my camp until dusk. All right, so that was pretty neat experience. Next day we went hiking. Okay, I hiked way more than I should have, but it was beautiful countryside up there, and it was really overall it was a great trip. You may recall from my last video that I thought that these cabinets on top were going to be a real nuisance, and it turns out that they were. They were just too big. And so what I decided to do was to shorten those. I shortened those, modified those, and I have to say that the new arrangement is much better. I do lose a little bit of storage space, but to me it's a lot. It's much more comfortable. I can sit on my bed now. I can sit across from the sink, and I don't have to worry about hitting my head all the time. So that was a big improvement that I made. The other thing I discovered on this trip was I really don't need as much bed space as what I've provided. Now I designed and I created this sliding bed arrangement so that I could have a nice big bed there. And the reason is because I thought that I would be having a couple of dogs sleeping with me most of the time. I've given up hopes on getting my wife to sleep on this with me. I think you have to be newlyweds in order to make this work for two people. But nevertheless, what I decided was, I could get away with just that section on the right. I didn't really need the section on the left. And the reason I can get away with that is because I don't think my dogs are going to want to sleep back there. This is the reason why. Turns out with the strategic placement of a couple of cushions, Lacey is very happy sleeping in the front seat, and what makes it tolerable for her is that I'm able to extend her bed out using my apple crate. So that apple crate, is turning out to be really useful. And speaking of the apple crate, here is one other use I found for it because my buddy Dave finally decided to take back his chop saw, so I'm not able to cut aluminum with that chop saw anymore. So I rigged up my angle grinder to use it kind of like a table saw for cutting strips of aluminum, and this actually works very well. I'm pretty happy with it. So that's another great use for my apple box. And by the way, I can cut aluminum when I'm on the road, so it makes it very portable. I can power this angle grinder from my inverter. So that's a pretty slick little development. As I said, I traveled some pretty rough road, on this camping trip. And what happened was that my kitchen cabinet started racking pretty severely. Now, I have this cabinet secured on the floor at the front and the back, and I have it secured at the top in the back, but I didn't have it secured at the top in the front. And as a result, what was happening was this thing started racking as I went over these rocks back and forth. And what I did was I added an additional bolt to keep it from racking on the 2-inch section. And then I also connected a strap connecting it to, drilling into the side of the van and attaching it to the upper right frame. So this makes the kitchen cabinet a lot more solid so that it won't go back and forth and potentially come loose. This, by the way, is another illustration for why I didn't want to finish the van. It looks pretty raggedy here, in terms of that foam board and the mesh and all that kind of stuff. But here, I had to cut into that stuff, and the more I had that finished, the harder it would have been to make these modifications. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about was the performance of my shower in the wild. Now, as you recall, the idea of this thing is to pour water into a oil pan on the ground and then suck that water up through a filter, using a water pump, and then pour it out the top of the shower through a hose sprayer. This worked pretty well, except that I did learn a couple of things. For one thing, you have to put in more water in the basin than I thought I would have to. And the reason is because I underestimated the amount of water that was going to cling to the shower curtain and to my body when I'm in the shower. And as a result, the pump, there isn't enough water draining down into the oil pan, and the pump starts sucking air. So I thought about this. I thought, well, should I redesign this shower pan and create like a well or something that would collect water? I would be standing on an upper level, and then the water would, flow down into this well and get sucked up. And then I thought, no, the easier thing is just to fill that oil pan up with more water. And so that's what I've concluded. But other than that, this thing worked pretty well. I could take a shower for as long as I liked. Now, in this particular instance, I was taking a cold shower, and I didn't mind because I just finished a really long, grueling hike. But, I thought that in the future I would probably just sun warm this water and use that as the shower. But overall, I was pretty happy with it. Here's a picture of it hanging up to dry. When you're all done, I just hang it on a tree and let it dry out. So, well, that's a few of the things that I learned on this trip, and there are going to be more modifications that I make to the van as I get more experience with it, and I'll let you know what happens.